The story you're about to witness begins in the dazzling heart of Dubai, where skyscrapers slice the sky like polished blades, and every night seems to breathe luxury, ambition, and secrets. Yet behind the golden curtains of this city of extremes lies a truth people rarely see, the invisible world of workers who keep the empire standing. Among them was a young waitress who lived her days serving billionaires who never bothered to look her in the eyes, unaware that she carried a past, a talent and a quiet fire powerful enough to shake the foundations of their certainty. This is not just a story about class, language, or luck, but about the moment destiny forces two worlds to collide. Before everything unraveled, before the humiliation, the discovery, and the final showdown, there was a single moment, a small, almost insignificant spark that changed everything. A billionaire, impatient and used to obedience, made a casual request in Arabic, assuming the girl in front of him wouldn't understand a word. What he didn't know was that she had lived a life far more complex than anyone could imagine, a life that had robbed her of comfort but gifted her with resilience, sharpness, and an intelligence most people never bothered to see. That one response, calm, fluent, and unexpected, would ignite a chain of events none of them could stop. But to understand why that moment mattered so profoundly, we must peel back the layers of their lives. His world, of power, wealth, and icy control, and hers of struggle, sacrifice, and silent brilliance. Only then can the audience truly feel the weight of what happened next, the rise and fall and rise again that would transform not only their destinies, but the fate of everyone around them. And so, with the lights dimming and the tension already simmering beneath the surface, we begin. In a city where fortunes are made overnight and lost just as quickly, every encounter holds the potential to become a turning point. But no one ever expects it to happen in a quiet cafe tucked between marble towers and roaring supercars. The billionaire, feared across business circles for his ruthless efficiency, stepped inside that afternoon, seeking nothing more than a place to hide from a problem too large even for him. His empire was under threat, shadows were moving against him, and yet, in that temporary refuge, he believed he was the only one carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. What he never imagined was that the most important clue to his crisis would come from someone he saw as insignificant. The waitress, on the other hand, had mastered the art of invisibility. She floated through tables with quiet precision, absorbing conversations, measuring tensions, learning patterns, all without ever being recognized. Her co-workers saw her as the quiet girl who worked double shifts, kept her head down, and never complained. But beneath her controlled silence lived the memories of a childhood split across borders, of nights studying languages to escape the fate her environment insisted was the only one available. Arabic wasn't merely a skill to her, it was part of her past, her identity, and the very reason she had lost everything once before. So when the billionaire issued that careless request in Arabic, spoken with the effortless authority of someone used to being obeyed instantly, he unknowingly cracked open the door to a story that had been waiting years to be told. Her fluent response didn't just surprise him, it disrupted the delicate balance of his assumptions, forcing him to see that the world contained layers he never bothered to notice. And in the echo of that brief exchange, both of their futures shifted, aligning them toward a collision neither of them saw coming, but both would soon be unable to escape. From that instant on, a quiet current began to move beneath them, subtle yet powerful enough to shift the trajectory of their lives. The billionaire's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous, curiosity. He wasn't a man who tolerated surprises, especially not from people he believed existed merely to serve and disappear. But as he stood there, momentarily stripped of his invisible crown, he felt an unfamiliar sensation tighten in his chest, the sense that he had severely underestimated someone. For a man accustomed to detecting threats in massive contracts and hostile negotiations, the realization that a simple waitress had caught him off guard struck deeper than his pride would ever allow him to admit. And as she walked away, unaware of the storm she had awakened, he found himself replaying her voice, her precision, her confidence, as if they were clues to a mystery he had never noticed in the room until until now. She, meanwhile, returned to her tasks with mechanical routine, but the encounter lingered in the back of her mind like a distant thunder she hoped would pass without breaking. She had spent years avoiding attention, years surviving by being small, efficient, invisible, a shadow moving through a world of giants who never cared enough to look down. Revealing her fluency, even unintentionally, felt like exposing a part of herself she had kept hidden to stay safe. Memories of her past life, the one she had lost, the one filled with promise and danger, pressed against her chest like a warning. She had crossed a line, even if she didn't know it yet, because men like him didn't encounter surprises and simply walk away. They always came back, searching for leverage, for explanations, for the cracks in other people's armor. And if there was one thing she feared more than failure, it was being seen by the wrong person at the wrong time. Yet destiny doesn't pause for fear, and fate had already begun weaving threads neither of them could break. Outside the cafe's glass walls, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, construction cranes swinging like metal giants, business deals being signed in penthouses, secrets changing hands under neon lights. But somewhere within that vast, glittering chaos, a problem was closing in on the billionaire with suffocating speed. Competitors were circling, allies were betraying, and a scandal was brewing that threatened to collapse everything he had built. And buried inside that chaos, hidden in a detail no one in his world could see, was something only a person with her precise knowledge could decipher. Their collision wasn't random. It was the beginning of a storm that would drag both of them into a journey of humiliation, revelation, power, sabotage, justice, and transformation so intense it would shake the foundations of every certainty they held. His name was Khalid Al Mansoor, a self-made billionaire whose rise from a crowded apartment in Sharjah to the heights of Dubai's financial elite had turned him into a legend people admired from afar but feared up close. His reputation was carved from decades of merciless decisions, boardroom victories, and an unshakable instinct for detecting deception. Yet that same instinct had grown cloudy in recent weeks as a silent threat tightened around his empire. Someone inside his own corporation was leaking confidential data, small details at first, but now large enough to endanger contracts worth billions. And while Khalid outwardly moved with the same precision and confidence, inside he was hunting a ghost he couldn't catch, a saboteur who always remained 2 steps ahead. When he walked into the cafe that day, he wasn't just tired, he was standing on the edge of a war he was losing without even knowing the enemy's face. The waitress he underestimated was Leila Haddad, a young woman whose past was stitched with fragments of countries, cultures, and heartbreak. Born to a Lebanese father and a Filipina mother, she had spent her early childhood drifting between cities, absorbing languages the way other children collected toys. Arabic wasn't something she learned, it was something she breathed. But after the sudden loss of her parents, a failed adoption, and a long period of instability, she ended up in Dubai, working humble jobs that hid her talent beneath layers of exhaustion and survival. To her co-workers, she was the quiet girl with the sharp gaze. To customers, she was the nameless shadow delivering their meals. But beneath that quiet exterior lived a mind trained by necessity, shaped by adversity, and sharpened by years of observing people who believed no one was watching. She had seen deception, power games, and manipulation long before she ever stood behind a cafe counter. So when Leila responded fluently to Khalid's casual request in Arabic, the moment struck him like a blade slipping through armor he thought was impenetrable. The clarity of her pronunciation, the subtlety of her dialect, the confidence in her tone, it all hinted at a background far more complex than he initially assumed. He found himself watching her with attention he couldn't explain, sensing possibilities he didn't yet understand. But Leila, unaware of the significance of that brief exchange, continued working, hoping he would forget her existence the moment he stepped outside. Yet fate, already tightening its grip on both of them, had other plans. For inside Khalid's crisis lay a code, a message, a single linguistic pattern that no security team, no analyst, no executive had been able to decipher. And only someone like Leila, someone who understood the hidden layers of Arabic dialects, the silent meanings woven between words, could see what everyone else had missed. Their worlds had brushed for a single moment, but the full collision was inevitable, and closer than either of them realized. Khalid tried to dismiss the encounter as nothing more than a curious moment, but the more he attempted to bury it beneath layers of meetings, calls, and crisis management, the more it resurfaced with unsettling persistence. He had spent the last month tearing through encrypted files, interrogating department heads, and hiring private cybersecurity teams, only to find himself trapped in a maze of clues that led nowhere. The breach inside his corporation wasn't random. It was meticulous, deliberate, executed by someone who understood not only technology, but culture, language, and the subtle art of misdirection. Whoever was orchestrating it had woven Arabic expressions from multiple regions into the data leaks, creating a linguistic labyrinth impossible for outsiders to decode. And now, all Khalid could hear, in the back of his mind, was Leila's voice, fluent and precise, cutting through the fog of his confusion like a shard of truth he didn't want to acknowledge. Leila, meanwhile, had no idea that her life had just crossed the boundary between anonymity and destiny. Her days continued the same. Long shifts, aching feet, and the quiet sadness of someone who carried a heavy history no one asked about. She lived in a tiny shared apartment at the edge of Deira, where the walls were thin, the street was always loud, and the future felt like a distant luxury. Yet every night as she lay awake, listening to the hum of the city, she replayed that moment with the billionaire. Not with excitement, but with the subtle dread of someone who had spent their life learning that unexpected attention usually led to danger. She had trained herself to stay invisible for survival, to never reveal the depth of her knowledge, especially in a city where a single mistake could erase everything she had worked to rebuild. But deep inside, beneath the layers of caution, a quiet spark flickered, the part of her that still dreamed of a life where her skills mattered, where her mind was her strength, not her secret. But destiny wasn't waiting for her readiness. Days after the encounter, as storm clouds gathered over Khalid's empire, a new leak appeared, one more sophisticated, more mocking, more dangerous than all the others combined. It contained a phrase written in a rare Levantine dialect, one used only in specific border villages across Lebanon and Syria, a dialect almost extinct outside certain families. When Khalid read it, something inside him went cold. It was as if the saboteur was taunting him, daring him to find meaning where none of his experts could. And in that chilling instant, Leila's voice echoed in his memory again, her pronunciation matching the very cadence embedded in the leak. That was the moment he understood. This wasn't a coincidence. He needed her, and whether she liked it or not. And the path that would force them together had already begun to unfold, silently, irreversibly, like the slow tightening of a trap neither could escape. The next morning, Khalid sat alone in his penthouse office, the city stretching beneath him, like a kingdom he could feel slipping from his grasp. Screens glowed with graphs, notifications, alerts, all signs of a network under attack. Yet his mind was fixated on a single truth he didn't want to accept. None of his experts, none of his consultants, none of his high-paid strategists could see what that waitress had recognized in a fraction of a second. It was infuriating, humbling, and, in its own way, terrifying. For a man like him, acknowledging dependence was a form of weakness, and yet the realization pressed against his chest until breathing felt like swallowing sand. He replayed the surveillance footage from the cafe, something he had access to through one of his many investment networks, and watched Leila move with the grace of someone accustomed to reading a room rather than being seen by it. Every gesture hinted at intelligence. Every expression suggested awareness. She wasn't simply fluent. She was fluent in a way that came from cultural intimacy, not textbooks. And for the first time, the possibility that she held the key to his crisis became impossible to ignore. Yet while Khalid's world tightened with urgency, Leila was enduring the kind of day that reminded her why she had built walls so high around her life. The cafe was crowded, the manager irritable, and a new employee had thrown the entire workflow into chaos. But what weighed on her more heavily was the unshakable feeling that she had stepped into a current she couldn't swim against. Ever since the encounter with Khalid, she had noticed subtle changes. Unfamiliar cars parked near her street, lingering glances from strangers, and a vague sense that someone had begun following her on her walk home. She told herself it was paranoia, born from exhaustion, but deep inside, she felt the unmistakable tension of a story she had lived before in another country, under different circumstances. She knew the signs of being watched. She knew the symptoms of danger rising, and still she said nothing, because survival had taught her that sometimes silence was the only shield she had left. But fate does not negotiate with fear. That evening, as she stepped out of the cafe after her shift, the sky heavy with desert twilight, she found herself face to face with the last person she wanted to see. Khalid Al Mansoor, leaning against a black SUV, dressed with the cold elegance of a man who never arrived anywhere without a purpose. His presence carved the air with authority, but his eyes held something more complex. Not arrogance, not intimidation, but a calculating intensity that told her he hadn't come for coffee, or curiosity, or even apology. He had come because he needed something only she could give. And though Leila froze, every instinct screaming at her to walk away, to disappear, to protect the fragile life she had built, some deeper force rooted her in place. She felt the weight of destiny pressing down, reshaping the path ahead. Khalid straightened, stepped forward, and in a voice low but commanding, spoke the words that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her place in the world. "Leila Haddad, we need to talk." Leila's breath tightened as Khalid's voice rippled through the fading light, carved with the kind of certainty that didn't allow for refusal. She had heard many tones in her life: anger, pity, desire, contempt. But this one was different. It carried urgency, calculation, and something colder beneath the surface. Desperation disguised as control. She didn't move. She didn't blink. She simply stared at him, searching for the reason a billionaire would be waiting outside a cafe for someone like her. Every instinct told her to run, to vanish into the crowd, to slip back into the anonymity she had mastered. Yet something about the way he held himself, the tension in his shoulders, the faint shadows beneath his eyes made her pause. Khalid Al Mansoor did not personally approach people. He summoned them. But now, here he was, standing before her, asking for a conversation he clearly wasn't used to needing. The imbalance of power was undeniable, but so was the strange sense that he was not the only one standing on unstable ground. Khalid studied her face with the precision of a man accustomed to dissecting every detail that crossed his path. He noticed the guarded stance, the way her fingers curled inward, the flicker of suspicion in her gaze, all signs of someone who had survived more than she had ever spoken aloud. She was not intimidated, just cautious, which in his world was far more dangerous. "I need your help," he finally said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. He wasn't a man who asked, he commanded. But with Leila, he sensed that force would yield nothing. He explained the leak, vaguely at first, the strange linguistic patterns, the code no one could break, the escalating threat that could dismantle his entire empire. And as he spoke, he watched her posture change. Her eyes sharpened, her breathing slowed. The fog of confusion on her face dissolved into something far more unsettling for him: recognition. She understood too well, and that alone confirmed everything he had begun to suspect. She was the missing piece he had been searching for. But Leila didn't respond. Immediately, she felt the weight of his words sinking deep into the corners of her mind, stirring memories she had fought to bury. She recognized the patterns he described, not because they were clever, but because they mirrored the coded messages she had once exchanged with people she should never have trusted. People who had used language as a weapon, a shield, a currency of power and betrayal. A chill crept through her spine, not because of Khalid, but because she understood exactly who might be behind the sabotage, and why he needed someone fluent not just in Arabic, but in its hidden dialects and unspoken politics. politics. She knew stepping into Khalid's world could destroy the fragile life she had rebuilt. Yet she also knew that ignoring this would not save her either. The threat circling him was too familiar, too precise, too close to the shadows she had escaped. As the desert wind brushed against her skin and Khalid waited for her answer, Leila realized that destiny had already chosen for her. The question was no longer if she would be dragged into the storm, but how deeply it would consume her. Leila lowered her gaze for a moment, letting the silence stretch long enough to test Khalid's patience, but not long enough to give him power over her choice. The street around them hummed with the ordinary sounds of the city, cars sliding past, vendors closing their stalls, distant laughter. Yet the air between them felt unnaturally still, as if the world itself was listening. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but carved with quiet steel. "If I get involved," she said, "there will be no going back." She didn't say it to intimidate him. She said it because it was the truth she needed him to understand. Her past wasn't a place she visited lightly. It was a minefield of old enemies, broken loyalties, and linguistic codes that belonged to people who didn't forgive betrayal. And whatever was happening inside his corporation wasn't random sabotage. It was personal, too personal. She felt it in the cadence of his description, in the structure of the messages, in the unmistakable signature of someone who once walked the same dangerous edges she had. Khalid listened without interrupting, a behavior so foreign to him it made Leila look up, surprised. He wasn't condescending or impatient or dismissive. He was focused. For the first time in weeks, he saw a path forming through the fog of chaos surrounding his empire. Her words didn't just confirm her relevance, they confirmed the gravity of the threat he was facing. "I don't have the luxury of turning back," he replied, each syllable weighted with the exhaustion he had been hiding from the world. In the glow of the streetlights, his expression momentarily softened, revealing the truth he would never admit publicly. He was losing control. And for a man whose identity had been built on command, certainty, and dominance, that vulnerability was a wound he didn't know how to hide. "Someone is trying to destroy everything I built. Someone who understands my weaknesses better than I do. And if what you say is true, then you're already part of this, whether you want to be or not." The words struck her harder than she expected. A tremor of fear rippled through her. Fear not of Khalid, but of the shadows that threaded through her past, the ones she had spent years escaping. She could feel them now, creeping closer, called back to life by the very patterns he had described. She knew that ignoring this would not protect her. It would only delay the inevitable. And as the night breeze curled around them, carrying the faint scent of the sea, she made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like surrendering to a story that had been chasing her since childhood. "Fine," she whispered, not looking at him but at the ground beneath her feet, as if bracing for a fall. "I'll help you, but on my terms." She didn't yet know how deep the conspiracy ran, or how much danger awaited them both, but she sensed that what was coming would shake their lives far beyond the boundaries of this street, this city, this moment. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and exhaustion, a spark ignited, the spark of a woman who had spent her entire life being underestimated, now stepping toward the fire with a strength even she had forgotten she possessed. Khalid exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in acknowledgement of the gravity of what she had just agreed to. He wasn't dealing with an employee or an advisor. He was dealing with someone who understood the silent underworld woven beneath languages, tribes, borders, and loyalties. Someone whose knowledge came from survival, not textbooks. "Name your terms," he said, bracing himself for demands he wasn't sure he could meet. But Leila didn't rush. She studied him with a gaze far older than her years, as though measuring not his wealth or his reputation, but the cracks beneath his armor. "No bodyguards following me," she said. "No surveillance on my home, no threats, no pressure, and if I say stop, you stop." Each condition fell like a stone in water, rippling through the layers of control he was accustomed to. He wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not by someone the world ignored. Yet as she spoke, he realized her terms weren't arrogance. They were protection, not just for herself, but for him as, well, she understood something he didn't, and that alone made her indispensable. He nodded, though the tension in his jaw betrayed how deeply her demands unsettled him. Her insistence on autonomy clashed sharply with his instinct to manage every variable, to command every step of the battlefield. But another part of him, the part that recognized competence when he saw it, knew her conditions came from experience, not ego. Agreed, he said finally. The word tasted unfamiliar, like a foreign concept he had rarely used in his ascent to power. As they moved toward his SUV, he noticed the slight tremor in her hands, subtle but unmistakable. She wasn't fearless. She was walking toward danger willingly, knowingly, because something inside her recognized the patterns in his crisis. And as she stepped into his world, literally into the sleek vehicle that symbolized everything she had never been allowed to touch, Khalid felt a strange shift in the air, as though the city itself sensed the first step in an alliance that would shake its hidden foundations. Inside the cabin, the city lights flickered across Leila's face as she took in the environment around her. The stitched leather, the silence, the hum of a machine capable of outrunning almost anything on the road. Yet she didn't shrink. If anything, she grew quieter, more focused, slipping into a mental space Khalid recognized from high-stakes negotiations, but had never seen in someone so young. "Show me the messages," she said, her voice steady. He handed her the encrypted tablet, expecting her to skim, to hesitate, to question. Instead, she dove straight into the linguistic maze, as though stepping into familiar terrain. Her eyes moved fast, decoding layers of dialect, rhythm, and political context woven between the lines. Khalid watched her in a stunned silence, realizing for the first time that this wasn't coincidence. It was fate, because in the span of minutes, her expression changed, freezing into a look that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. She recognized something dangerous, something personal, and when she finally lifted her head, the words she whispered chilled him more deeply than the threat itself. "Khalid, I know who wrote this." The temperature inside the SUV seemed to drop as Leila's words echoed in the confined space. Khalid stiffened, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel even though the engine wasn't running. He had expected insights, maybe a translation, perhaps a clue, but not recognition. Not this. "What do you mean you know who wrote it?" he asked, his voice low but carrying the weight of a man bracing for an impact he couldn't see. Leila didn't answer immediately. She kept her eyes on the tablet, not to read, but as if staring into the past through the lines on the screen. "This pattern," she murmured, "is a signature, not a linguistic one. A personal one. Someone taught me to read. Codes this way years ago. Someone who used dialects like hidden blades." A bitterness crept into her voice, breaking through the composure she fought to maintain. "And he didn't just vanish from my life. He vanished from several governments' radars. If he's resurfacing now, using you as a target, it's because he's sending a message. And it's not meant for you. It's meant for me." Khalid turned his full attention to her, absorbing every fragment of her revelation with the growing realization that he had walked into a battlefield he didn't understand. "Who is he?" he demanded. But Leila shook her head, her eyes shimmering with the kind of memory that carried both fear and fury. "Not here," she whispered. "Not while we're exposed." It was the first time Khalid truly saw how deep her trauma ran, how carefully she had built her life to stay off the radar of shadows he didn't even know existed. He understood ruthless competitors, ambitious board members, political wolves disguised as allies. But what she hinted at belonged to a different world entirely, a world of covert networks, hidden loyalties, forbidden trades, and codes used not for business but for survival. The kind of world where enemies didn't simply destroy reputations, they erased lives. And suddenly, the idea that a mere corporate saboteur was behind the leaks seemed naive. The SUV felt smaller now, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of danger. Khalid wasn't a man, easily intimidated, but something about the calm precision of her fear unsettled him. She wasn't spiraling, she wasn't exaggerating, she was remembering, calculating, surviving, and that alone told him everything he needed to know. Whoever this man was, he was not someone to underestimate. "Leila," Khalid said quietly, "if he's targeting me to get to you, then you're not stepping into my war. I'm stepping into yours." His words weren't dramatic. They were factual, spoken with the clarity of a man who finally understood the magnitude of the threat. Leila looked at him, really looked at him, as if measuring whether he had any idea what he was inviting into his life. Then, slowly, she nodded, her voice dropping to a fragile whisper that carried more truth than either of them was prepared for. "Welcome to a world where there are no rules." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city outside continued its restless pulse. Horns, engines, distant chatter. But inside the SUV, the silence thickened into something almost physical. Leila's revelation had shifted the ground beneath them, but what unsettled Khalid even more was the realization that she wasn't shocked by any of this. She wasn't overwhelmed or confused or panicked. She was bracing, preparing, as if she had always known that one day the past she had outrun would find a crack in her new life and seep through. "If you know who he is," Khalid finally said, "then you understand why I can't let this continue." His tone carried no threat, only the controlled intensity of a man who had spent years dismantling obstacles with precision. But this wasn't a merger or a hostile takeover or a legal loophole. And as Leila lifted her eyes to meet his, he saw something in them he had never encountered across a boardroom table, a silent warning, not for him, but for herself. "He won't stop," she said softly, "not when he's already this close." She took a slow breath, one that trembled at the end, despite her efforts to steady it. "His name is—" She stopped herself, her jaw tightening. Saying it aloud would give it power. It would summon memories she had kept buried in the deepest parts of her mind. Memories of the man who trained her, manipulated her, and used her brilliance as his weapon, before leaving her stranded in a web of consequences she barely survived. "He was once a mentor," she finally confessed. "Someone who taught me how to see patterns in languages most people overlook. Someone who believed words could be used to control people as easily as money or fear." Her hands tightened around the tablet, knuckles whitening. "But he didn't teach me those things out of kindness. He taught me because he wanted to build a tool, a weapon, and when I refused to become what he wanted, he made sure I paid the price." Khalid felt something shift inside him. Not pity, but a sharp, cold fury. Someone had taken this girl, this mind, this potential, and tried to twist her into something dark. And now that same shadow was manipulating his empire, dragging her back into a world she had every right to escape. "Tell me what you need," Khalid said, his voice lower than before, steadier, forged with purpose. Leila looked at him, studying the man behind the wealth and the empire, the exhaustion, the ferocity, the stubbornness that had built his kingdom brick by brick. She realized he wasn't asking out of obligation. He wasn't asking because he needed her. He was asking because he recognized something of himself in her, a survivor, a fighter, someone who knew what it meant to build a life from the ashes of a past designed to destroy them. And in that moment, sitting beside a man she barely knew yet could no longer avoid, she understood the truth. This wasn't just about decoding messages. This was about confronting the ghost who had shaped both her nightmares and her brilliance. And she whispered the only answer that made sense, the one that would ignite the next chapter of their collision. "I need to go back to where it started." Khalid didn't question her. The certainty in Leila's voice was enough to tell him that where it started wasn't just a place. It was a wound, a battlefield carved into her past. But he also knew that returning there meant stepping into a territory where his money, his influence, and even his name meant nothing. Still, he leaned back in his seat, clasping his hands as he weighed the risk, like a man calculating the odds of war. "Then we go," he said simply. No hesitation, no negotiation, just resolve. It startled Leila, not because she doubted his determination, but because she knew the danger waiting for them had been designed by someone who studied human weakness with surgical precision. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Going back means stepping into his playground. It means letting him see us coming." Khalid's expression hardened with a quiet steadiness. "Then we won't go quietly." And in that moment she realized that despite his flaws, his ruthlessness, his arrogance, Khalid Al Mansoor possessed one trait her former mentor had always underestimated. He wasn't afraid to confront the enemy face to face. The next hours unfolded like a slow descent into a storm. Khalid drove her to a discreet safe house on the outskirts of the city, a place used for high-stakes negotiations, where deals too dangerous for the public eye were quietly resolved. Inside, the walls were thick, the windows tinted, and the security system advanced enough to deter even the boldest intruders. Leila stepped inside cautiously, scanning every corner, every shadow, every sound. Old habits, survival habits, resurfaced instantly. Khalid watched her with a mixture of concern and admiration. There was a focus in her movements, a sharpness in her breathing, as if she were returning to a version of herself she had buried long ago. "You said he taught you to read patterns," Khalid said, as he activated the secure network. "Show me what he taught you." Before he twisted it, the discomfort that flickered across her face was brief, but he noticed it. Still, she took the tablet and pulled up the encrypted messages, her fingers trembling only for a moment before moving with the confidence of someone stepping back into a language they once mastered. As she worked, the truth began to unravel, not in words, but in the structure, the cadence, the rhythm, hidden beneath the surface of each message. "He's not just sabotaging your company," Leila murmured, her brows tightening as she pieced together fragments like a puzzle meant to mislead. "He's testing me. He's watching how quickly I respond. He's escalating the complexity because he wants me to know he's one step ahead." She swallowed hard, a shiver running down her spine as her mentor's ghost sharpened into something terrifyingly real. "He's baiting me." The color drained from Khalid's face. He wasn't a man easily rattled, but the idea that this unknown enemy was choreographing their every move sent a chill through him. "What does he want?" Khalid asked. Leila closed her eyes, exhaling slowly as the truth surfaced like a shadow rising from deep water. "He wants me back under his control," she whispered, "and he's using you as the leverage to do it." The room fell silent, heavy with the realization that this wasn't Khalid's war or Leila's past. It was the opening move of an enemy who had already planned every step that would follow. Khalid felt the truth settle over him like a suffocating mantle. Every message, every leak, every calculated linguistic signature wasn't aimed at destabilizing his empire, at least not primarily. He was collateral damage, a pawn chosen for his visibility, his power, his resources. The real target had been sitting across from him all along. "He's forcing your hand," Khalid said quietly, not accusing but understanding. Leila's eyes darkened as she nodded. "He always forces the hand. He creates chaos, then pretends to offer the solution. It's how he recruits. It's how he traps people with talent." She paused, her gaze drifting to the window as if seeing scenes from another lifetime. "I was young when I met him, too young to understand the difference between admiration and manipulation." The bitterness in her tone wasn't directed at Khalid. It was aimed inward, at the version of herself that once believed brilliance could protect her from darkness. "By the time I realized what he was building, it was too late. I wasn't a student anymore. I was an asset." Her voice tightened, and assets are never allowed to walk away. Khalid's fists clenched, not out of anger at her past, but at the man who dared to use her like a tool. He understood exploitation. He had seen it in business, in politics, in the underbelly of negotiations where loyalty was worthless and fear was currency. But what she described was far more intimate, far more invasive. "If he wants you back," Khalid said. Then involving me was a mistake on his part. Leila looked at him sharply, unsure if he understood the danger he was inviting, but he continued before she could speak. He miscalculated. He assumed I'd panic. He assumed I'd fire you, get rid of you, or distance myself to protect my company. A slow, controlled fire ignited behind his eyes, the kind of fire that built empires and crushed rivals. He assumed wrong. Leila studied him, surprised by the shift. Khalid wasn't afraid. He wasn't retreating. He was becoming something far more dangerous to her former mentor, an ally she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. And for the first time since the messages began, Leila felt a thread of confidence weaving through her fear. She returned her focus to the tablet, scanning deeper into the structural fingerprints embedded in the encrypted text. Hidden beneath the layers of dialect was something she hadn't noticed before, a cadence too personal, too familiar, too precise to be accidental, a message inside the message. Her breath caught Khalid. He's not just baiting me. She zoomed in, isolating a pattern that repeated like a heartbeat. He's telling me where he is. Khalid leaned closer, his pulse quickening. He wants you to come to him, he said. Exactly, Leila whispered, but not alone. She pointed to a subtle shift in verb tense, a rare choice used only by speakers trained in certain intelligence circles. He expects you to bring me. He wants a confrontation. He wants a stage. The realization washed over them both. This wasn't an ambush. It was an invitation, calculated, theatrical, and engineered by a mind that thrived on control. Leila's voice trembled as she concluded, he wants to show me that no matter how far I ran, he still decides the rules. And Khalid, feeling the full weight of the challenge, answered with quiet certainty, then we change the rules. The decision to confront him, to step directly into the trap he had crafted, wasn't made lightly. It hovered between them like a storm cloud, heavy and charged with danger. But Leila knew there was no other path. Running would only draw him closer, hiding would only provoke him, and fighting from a distance was impossible against a man who built his power through psychological warfare and linguistic shadows. He'll expect us to follow the trail, she said, her voice steady but layered with a dread she couldn't fully suppress. He'll expect us to walk into his chosen ground, and he'll expect me to break the moment I see him. A shiver moved through her, but she didn't look away. She forced herself to meet the truth. He trained me to obey, to notice everything except my own fear, to analyze threats without knowing I was becoming one. Her throat tightened. Going back to him means facing the part of myself he tried to shape. Khalid listened with a stillness that didn't exist in his world of rapid-fire decisions and relentless ambition. Then we don't go as prey, he said. We go as equals. His confidence unsettled her, but not because it was misplaced, because it was unfamiliar. No one had ever fought beside her before. No one had ever chosen to willingly challenge a man who controlled people through invisible strings. Yet Khalid sat there with an unwavering focus, already dissecting the situation, already building strategies around the patterns she revealed. For a moment, she could almost see him as her mentor would have, a powerful figure, predictable in his pride, a perfect pawn to exploit. But Leila pushed the thought aside. Khalid was not her former mentor. He didn't manipulate her brilliance. He acknowledged it. He didn't use her fear. He questioned it. And where her mentor demanded loyalty as a currency, Khalid offered something she had forgotten existed: partnership. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. Tell me where he is. She exhaled, pushing past the tightness in her chest as she decoded the final layer. He's in Beirut, she said, in the old quarter, a place where language is power and secrets are traded more openly than money. And just like that, the battlefield was set. But Beirut wasn't just a location. It was a memory, wrapped in streets she had fled from, alleys that whispered her name long after she disappeared. It was where she had been shaped, tested, betrayed, and where she had almost lost herself. Returning meant reopening wounds she had sealed with years of distance. Khalid saw the fear flicker across her face, a brief but raw glimpse into the pain she carried. He didn't dismiss it. He didn't question it. Instead, he adjusted his posture and spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had made a decision he wouldn't reverse. We prepare tonight, he said. "We fly at dawn." Leila nodded slowly, acknowledging not just the plan, but the irreversible step they were taking together. As she looked at the encrypted messages, the ones that had haunted her from the moment she decoded the first pattern, she understood something profound. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the crossing point between who she had been and who she would become. And as the night deepened around them, the shadow of her past grew larger, clearer, and impossibly close, waiting for her return. The hours before dawn became a crucible of preparation, quiet but electric, as Khalid and Leila worked side by side for the first time, two vastly different worlds merging into a single, dangerous purpose. Khalid arranged travel logistics through back channels, using private routes and unlisted manifests that only men with his level of power could access. Yet behind every confident order he issued, Leila sensed a deeper understanding forming in him, a recognition that money alone could not protect them from what awaited in Beirut. Meanwhile, she gathered every fragment of knowledge she had suppressed for years. Old dialect shifts, coded gestures used by her mentor's circle, the tension-filled architecture of the old quarter where every street corner held a memory she would rather forget. The safe house buzzed with soft light, screens humming, documents scattered across the table, and between them an unspoken truth crystallized. They were walking into a confrontation designed to break her, and Khalid knew he had to be more than a shield. He had to be her equal in a world he did not understand. As the night thinned and the cloaked horizon began to grey, Leila felt the weight of the journey pressing deeper into her core. She wasn't afraid of the confrontation itself. She was afraid of who she might become within it. Her mentor had shaped her like a weapon, sharpening her brilliance into something cold, calculating, dangerous. She had spent years softening that edge, forcing herself to live simply, anonymously, believing that invisibility could protect her from the monster who had once called himself her guide. But now she was returning to the city, where he had first marked her as his chosen prodigy. The memories rose unbidden, the dim study lit by a single lamp, his voice instructing her to recognize dialect shifts in a heartbeat, the pride in his eyes when she succeeded, the manipulative restraint in his praise, the slow poison of control disguised as mentorship. Khalid watched her from across the room, reading the shadows in her expression. "He didn't make you," Khalid said quietly. "He only exposed what was already there." The words landed in her chest like a slow burning ember, a truth she had never allowed herself to consider. When their flight time approached, Khalid closed the last encrypted file, stood, and walked to her with a calm intensity that settled the storm roaring inside her. "This ends in Beirut," he said. "Not a threat, not a promise, a statement carved from conviction." Leila nodded, though her pulse thundered with the gravity of the moment. She slipped the tablet into her bag, wrapped a scarf around her shoulders, and stepped toward the door, each movement a step away from the girl who had once run, and closer to the woman who would now return to reclaim her life. As they exited the safe house and the early morning wind swept across her face, she understood something with a clarity that cut through the fear. She wasn't returning as his student. She wasn't returning as his creation. She was returning as his reckoning. And with Khalid beside her, powerful, relentless, flawed, and unexpectedly human, she felt the faint stirrings of a strength she had buried long ago. The sky brightened as they approached the jet, and for the first time since her childhood in Beirut, Leila stepped forward without looking back.